Welcome to Geopolitics Digest for Wednesday, June 26, 2024. As predicted yesterday, today's headlines were dominated by Julian Assange's release from prison and the implication it has for freedom of speech, civil liberties, and journalism. Here's the lineup for today's episode. First, we'll review Alex Christophorou's news updates, and then Duran's coverage on the terrorist attacks in Russia. Then the new Atlas's report on the U.S. covert COVID-19 disinformation efforts in Asia. Then Glen Greenwald's interview with Fang and Paulson on Israel's influence operations in the U.S. Then Kim Iverson's report in the same article written by Fang and Paulson. Then her report on Julian Assange, and her reporting on the turmoil in Kenya. Then we'll move on to Dialogue Works interview with Matt Hoh and Pepe Escobar. Then we'll back to Glen Greenwald's takedown of the lies spread by American media and government regarding Assange. Then Tucker Carlson's defense of Julian Assange. Then we'll move to Judging Freedom's interview with Anya Parampil and Andrei Martayno'v. Then we'll move on to Andrei Martayno'v's sitrep for today. And lastly, with Piers Morgan's heated debate regarding Julian Assange and his conversation with George Galloway. Let's start with Christophorou. Christophorou begins by discussing the reappointment of Ursula von der Leyen, and which he describes as a decision not made by popular vote, but by a select group of globalists. He highlights the absence of traditional electoral campaigns, suggesting that von der Leyen's contributions to various industries and her stance on geopolitical conflicts were the true drivers of her selection. This portrayal of the reappointment process invites the audience to consider the extent to which EU leadership reflects the will of its citizens. The report continues with an examination of EU's diplomatic appointments, particularly focusing on Kaja Kallas's new role as a chief EU diplomat. Christophorou expresses skepticism about Kallas's qualifications, emphasizing her aggressive stance towards Russia. He humorously predicts that her approach to international relations will be overly simplistic and militaristic, potentially leading to further tensions rather than diplomatic resolution. Shifting focus to the EU, Christophorou touches on the situation in Kenya, where public outrage over proposed tax hikes has led to violent protests and tragic loss of life. He uses this event to illustrate the broader theme of governmental disconnect from the populace, drawing parallels between the EU's top-down decision-making and the Kenyan government's controversial finance bill. The report also covers the EU's accession talks with Moldova and Ukraine, which Christophorou views with a critical lens. He argues that the criteria for EU membership have become overly politicized, prioritizing opposition to Russia over economic stability and legal reforms. Christophorou warns that hastily expanding the EU to include these nations could lead to financial strain and a hastened disintegration of the Union. Regarding the role of media and information in shaping public perception, Christophorou points out the irony of the situation, noting that while the EU champions the values of freedom of speech and information plurality, its actions speak to a contrasting reality. He suggests that such measures are not just about controlling the narrative, but also about consolidating power within the hands of a few who can steer the public opinion to align with their political agendas. This is in the wake of the European Union's decision in May to ban a slew of Russian media outlets, including RIA Novosti and Gazeta, labeling them as Kremlin-linked propaganda networks. This ban, which came into effect on June 25th, effectively silences these voices within EU, compelling citizens to rely on VPNs for access, thus creating an echo chamber of EU-sanctioned narratives. Christophorou also delves into the Russian response, which was to reciprocate by banning over 80 EU media outlets, including prominent ones like the Cyprus Mail. This tit-for-tat banishment of media sources escalates what Christophorou describes as an information war, where the casualty is the truth itself. He argues that in the absence of diverse range of perspectives, citizens are left with a myopic view of the world events, one that is often tainted by the interests of those in power. Christophorou's commentary extends to the global stage, where he draws parallels between EU's media bans and the situation in Kenya. In conclusion, Christophorou reports serves as a clarion call for the need for transparency and diversity in media. He urges the public to seek out multiple sources of information and to critically evaluate narratives being presented. By doing so, citizens can form a more nuanced understanding of the world, one that is less susceptible to manipulation by those who wield power to shape what we see, hear, and ultimately believe. Now let's move on to the Duran. In their recent report, Christophorou and Mercurio provide a detailed analysis of the sequence of terrorist attacks in Russia, particularly focusing on the incidents in Dagestan and the broader implications for Russian security and inter-ethnic relations. The recent months, Russia has witnessed a disturbing uptick in terrorist attacks, which attacks spanning from Moscow to the Northern Caucasus. The report by Christophorou and Mercurio delves into the intricacies of these events, shedding light on the potential orchestrators and their motives. This essay, the heart of the report, revolves around the attacks in Dagestan, where religious institutions were targeted, including an Orthodox church and a synagogue. The violence claimed the lives of a priest and several security officials, marking a grim period for the region known for its religious diversity. Christophorou and Mercurio posit that these attacks are not isolated incidents, but part of a much larger pattern of terrorism that Russia has been grappling with for decades. The report suggests that the attackers in Dagestan, as well as those involved in previous incidents such as the Korkor City Hall attack, are affiliates of ISIS. However, the discussion goes further, implicating Ukrainian and U.S. intelligence as the possible masterminds behind these operations, as asserted by Russian officials. This claim is substantiated, could have significant implications for the already strained Russia-U.S. relations. Christophorou and Mercurio argue that the attacks are part of a strategy to sow discord and chaos within Russia by targeting religious and ethnic fault lines. The perpetrators aim to destabilize the societal fabric and undermine the Russian state. The report highlights the sophistication of these operations, suggesting that these are designed to provoke a heavy-handed response from Russian authorities, which could further inflame tensions. Despite the severity of the attacks, the report concludes with a note of resilience and underscores a strong sense of community and unity among the Russian people, particularly in the Northern Caucasus, where memories of past conflicts have fostered a collective determination to resist the spread of extremism. The report echoes Christophorou and Mercurio's sentiment that while the threat of terrorism is real, the resolve of the Russian people and the strategic acumen of its leaders will likely prevail. Now let's move on to Brian Berletic's recent report entitled Reuters exposes Washington's global disinformation campaign, the rest of the story, which delves into the extensive and covert disinformation effort conducted by the United States government, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. The report highlights the secret campaign by the Pentagon aimed at undermining China's influence, especially in the Philippines, by spreading false information about the safety and efficacy of Chinese vaccines and medical supplies. Berletic emphasizes that this campaign was not limited to the Philippines but spanned across Southeast Asia and beyond. The disinformation efforts involved creating fake social media accounts to impersonate locals and spread fear and distrust towards Chinese products. This campaign was not driven by genuine public health concerns but by a strategic goal to tarnish China's reputation. The report also criticizes the role of the U.S. Department and organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy in amplifying these disinformation narratives through local opposition groups and political parties. In Thailand, for instance, U.S.-backed groups protested against the Thai government's cooperation with China, demanding the procurement of Western vaccines instead. Berletic argues that these disinformation campaigns are part of a broader strategy by the U.S. to maintain its global dominance by undermining China's growing influence. He provides evidence of the U.S. government's long-standing involvement in manipulating public opinion and political landscape in various countries, including Thailand, through funding and supporting of opposition movements. The report concludes by stressing the importance of nations protecting their information spaces from such foreign interference. Berletic suggests that countries should develop local alternatives to U.S.-based social media platforms and seek assistance from nations like China and Russia, which have successfully secured their own information spaces. In summary, Berletic's report sheds light on the covert and extensive nature of U.S. disinformation campaigns aimed at undermining China and influencing global public opinion. It calls for greater awareness and measures to protect national information sovereignty. Now let's go into Glen Greenwald's interview with Fang and Paulson. In this recent groundbreaking interview, Greenwald engaged with independent journalists Lee Fang and Jack Paulson to unravel the complexities of Israeli influence operations within the United States. The discussion, based on their collaborative investigation, sheds light on the covert strategies employed by Israel to shape American legislative processes, social media narratives, and academic discourse. Lee Fang, known for his investigative prowess, and Jack Paulson, with his expertise at the nexus of technology and military affairs, have teamed up to expose the undercurrents of influence that ripple through the American political social landscape. Their findings, published in collaboration with The Guardian, reveal the extent of Israel's covert influence campaign aimed at the United States. The article, titled Israel Documents Show an Extensive Covert U.S. Influence Campaign, details how Israeli government officials coordinate closely with advocacy groups to influence congressional and state legislation, social media, and campus discourse. This concerted effort is not new, but a continuation of a long-standing practice that has recently gained momentum. One of the most significant revelations from the investigation is the role of the U.S. nonprofit, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, ISGAP, originally at Yale Center. Yale Center, ISGAP, has been instrumental in orchestrating hearings that led to the dismissal of several university presidents. These actions are part of a broader public-private partnership known as CONCERT that involves the Israeli government funding half of the operations, with philanthropists contributing the remainder. The CONCERT strategy, as referenced in the interview, is a semi-covert operation controlled by the Israeli government. It has been responsible for running social media troll armies, lobbying in the U.S., and aiding the passage of anti-BDS laws across state capitals. The recent relaunch of this unit has seen it partner with various groups to extend its reach, including outreach to African American lawmakers and assisting social media giants like Meta and TikTok in censoring content critical of Israel. A pivotal part of the agenda is the push to pass laws incorporating the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism into the U.S. This move aims to stifle criticism of Israel by equating harsh criticism of Israeli military and political policy with hate speech or illegal discrimination. The focus on elite universities is strategic, as these institutions often set trends that influence American society at large. The Israeli government, through organizations like Mosaic United, funds pro-Israel student groups and encourages them to monitor and even spy on Palestinian student groups, lobby university administrators, and influence campus activities. The interview with Greenwald, Fang, and Paulson is a testament to the power of independent journalism in uncovering the veiled mechanisms of foreign influence. It calls into question the ethical boundaries of such operations and the implications for free speech and democratic processes. As the conversation around foreign influence continues to evolve, the work of Fang and Paulson serves as a crucial piece in understanding the multifaceted nature of international relations and their preservation of autonomy in domestic affairs. The revelation brought forth by Fang and Paulson investigation are a stark reminder of the intricate web of influence that foreign governments can weave within another nation's borders. The implications of their findings are profound, challenging the very notion of sovereignty and the integrity of national policies. As we navigate an increasingly interconnected world, the vigilance of independent journalists like Fang and Paulson is indispensable in safeguarding the principles of transparency and accountability. Now let's move on to Kim Iverson's report on Israel, in which she delves into the intricate web of influence that Israeli government has woven within the United States. The report uncovers the Israeli government's strategic efforts to shape American perception and policies toward Israel, particularly among young people and universities. The report highlights the Israeli government campaign by Amichai Hickley, a minister in the Israeli government. The campaign aimed to counter anti-war protests in the United States, particularly at top universities. The Israeli government relaunched a controversial program called Voices of Israel to redefine anti-Semitism in U.S. law to include harsh criticism of Israel. The report also reveals the Israeli government's financial support to various American advocacy groups. These groups in turn use these funds to influence American perception and policy on Israel. One such group, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism Policy, ISGAP, lobbied for congressional investigations into universities, pushing the idea that protests against Israel actions were motivated by anti-Semitism. Iverson's report also sheds light on the role of pro-Israel U.S. student groups, which received financial and strategic support from Israeli sources. These groups influenced American students and reported back to the Israeli government about their successes. The report further discusses the influence of pro-Israel lobbies such as the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, on U.S. policies. These lobbies have spent millions of dollars on lobbying efforts and have contributed heavily to political campaigns to ensure that U.S. policies remain favorable to Israel. In conclusion, Iverson's report raises critical questions about the extent of foreign influence on U.S. policies and the need for greater transparency. It calls for a redefinition of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, to include any support for Israel and demands that politicians and lobbies be subjected to the same regulations as journalists. The report underscores the importance of ensuring the U.S. policies reflect the true interests of the American people and not the strategic goals of Israel alone. Now let's go on to Iverson's reporting on Julian Assange. The saga of Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, has been a tumultuous narrative of pursuit, incarceration, and the relentless quest for truth. Kim Iverson's recent report sheds light on the latest developments in the Assange story, marking a significant turn of events that appeared to be leading to his long-awaited liberation. Assange's journey to the courtroom in the Mariana Islands was a momentous occasion, signaling the possibility of an end to his prolonged confinement. Iverson's report captures the palpable anticipation as Assange, now 52, entered the courtroom, a stark contrast to the man who, at 40, sought refuge within the walls of the Ecuadorian embassy. For 7 years, Assange remained within the embassy's confines, followed by over 5 years in the Belmarsh prison, where he faced isolation in a 2-by-3-meter cell for 23 hours a day. Iverson emphasizes the gravity of this ordeal, highlighting the 1,901 days Assange spent in conditions that many would have equated to solitary confinement. Initially facing 18 charges and the prospect of 175 years in prison, Assange's situation has now been distilled to a single charge: conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defense information. Iverson's analysis of the court documents reveal the complexities of and potential implications of this charge for journalism and freedom of speech. The report delves into the intricacies of the Espionage Act under which Assange was charged. Iverson questions the Act's broad terms such as quote-unquote access and disclose, and the ramifications that these could have on journalists and publishers. The Act's vagueness leaves much to interpretation, potentially criminalizing the mere act of receiving or sharing information deemed classified. Iverson's report does not shy away from the broader implications of Assange's case. If the precedent is set that publishing classified documents is a crime, it could have a chilling effect on journalism and the public's right to know. The report calls for outrage and solidarity from news organizations and the public alike. The report concludes with cautious optimism as plans for Assange's flight to Australia are already underway, contingent on the outcome of the court proceedings. Iverson captures the collective breath being held by supporters worldwide, awaiting the confirmation of Assange's freedom. Iverson's report on Julian Assange's compelling narrative that goes beyond the individual. It speaks to the heart of democratic values, press freedom, and the right to information. As the world watches and waits, the outcome of Assange's case will undoubtedly leave an indelible mark on the annals of history and the future of journalism. All right, now let's move on to Iverson's reporting on Kenya, which highlights the severe economic and social turmoil the country is facing due to new tax measures and rising living costs. The government's decision to implement these taxes is driven by need to repay $3 billion in debt to the International Monetary Fund, which was taken out in 2010. The IMF has imposed strict conditions on Kenya, including the widening the tax base, increasing VAT on essential goods, and cutting public sector jobs. These measures have sparked widespread protests and riots, resulting in at least 9 deaths and over 300 arrests. The report also contrasts the IMF's approach with that of China, which has provided Kenya with more substantial financial support without imposing such stringent conditions. China's investments focus on infrastructure projects and resource extraction rather than dictating economic policies. This difference in approach has led to significant public discontent with the IMF's demands, which are seen as exacerbating poverty and economic instability. Additionally, Iverson discusses the geopolitical implications of Kenya's alignment with the West, particularly the United States, which has designated Kenya as a major non-NATO ally. This designation comes with certain benefits, but also ties Kenya more closely with Western military and economic interests, potentially at the expense of its sovereignty and economic stability. The report underscores the complex interplay between global financial institutions, national economic policies, and local social political dynamics, illustrating how external pressures can lead to internal strife and highlighting the broader implications of international economic policies on developing nations. Now let's move on to the interview with Matt Hoh on Dialogue Works with NEMA. In this interview with Matt Hoh, several critical points are raised that delve into the intricate web of international relations and the political maneuvers of Western governments, particularly the United States. Matt Hoh regards Julian Assange as a poignant symbol of the struggle for press freedom. He views the prolonged ordeal of Assange, who sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy over a decade ago, as a stark warning from the U.S. to journalists worldwide. Hoh interprets this as a message that those who expose government crimes or deviate from the official narrative will face severe consequences. According to Hoh, the U.S. government has effectively placed Julian's head on a pike as a deterrent for others. This metaphor underscores the punitive measures taken against Assange and the chilling effect it has on journalistic freedom. Ho's friend Misty Winston describes the 12-year captivity that Assange and his family endured as a period devoid of judicial decision or due process, highlighting the procedural nature of his extradition hearings and in the British courts. Ho emphasizes that the legal proceedings against Assange have not addressed whether his actions constituted a crime. Instead, they have focused on procedural aspects, sidestepping the core issues of the First Amendment and free speech. Ho suggests that the Biden administration may fear losing the case, which could prove not only embarrassing but also significant legal defeat. The interview captures Ho's mixed emotions. On the day it seems possible that Assange might be freed, he expresses profound happiness for Assange's family and potential reunification, yet remains deeply angered by the injustice and suffering endured. Ho anticipated of traveling to London for an appeal hearing, which was unexpectedly cancelled due to his release, reflects the unpredictability and gravity of the situation. Despite the potential of Assange's release, Ho cautions that the fight for press freedom is far from over. The case of Julian Assange remains a critical test to the right to free speech and the willingness of judicial systems to uphold this fundamental principle. While most of the discussion did revolve around Julian Assange, they also talked about some geopolitical situations going on in the world. Ho discusses the political calculations that drive the U.S. and its allies to support actions that, while maintaining power and avoiding electoral losses, risk escalating conflict to the brink of nuclear war. This support, often extended to the countries attacking civilians, is a calculated strategy to preserve geopolitical dominance. A significant portion of the conversation revolves around the conflict in Ukraine. Ho criticizes the failure of the U.S. and NATO to acknowledge Russia's attempts at negotiations and the insistence on Ukrainian neutrality as the core issue. He argues that the West's portrayal of the conflict oversimplifies the situation and ignores the complexities that could lead to a dangerous escalation. The interview also touches on the internal political pressures within Russia that could influence their military response. The civilian casualties caused by Western-supplied weapons in Crimea are a point of contention, potentially affecting Russia's approach to the conflict. Moving to the Middle East, Ho highlights the consequences of rejecting peace negotiations as seen with the Taliban and the Russian-Ukraine conflict. The shift in power dynamics favors hardliners and military solutions over diplomatic ones, leading to increased human suffering and long-term instability. The role of American politics and media in shaping the narrative and foreign policy is another theme discussed. Individuals like Brett McGurk are mentioned as key players in this process. These strategic interests driving alliances, such as the potential defense agreement between U.S. and Saudi Arabia, in exchange for normalizing relations with Israel, are scrutinized for the impact on their region's stability. Matt Hoh Matt Hoh's interview is a poignant reminder that the complexities of international relations. It calls for recognition of the multifaceted nature of conflicts and the danger of oversimplified narratives. The essay underscores the need for a balanced approach that considers the long-term consequences of political ambitions and the human cost of maintaining power. Now let's go into the interview with Pepe Escobar. In a recent dialogue, Pepe Escobar provided a detailed account on the terrorist attacks in Russia, shedding light on the tragic events that struck civilians in Sevastopol and Dagestan. Escobar characterizes these attacks as a war of terror, orchestrated by forces operating from Washington, Brussels, and Kiev. He describes the attacks as devoid of strategy or tactics, aimed solely at instilling fear and chaos. On a day that should have been filled with celebration, a Christian Orthodox holiday in Russia, the city of Sevastopol was marred by violence. Escobar recounts how 5 missiles, each costing $1 million each, were launched simultaneously, with one tragically reaching its target. The result was a scene of devastation on the beach where families had gathered, leading to the loss of innocent lives, including children, and injuring at least 150 people. The absence of military targets in the area underscores the civilian nature of the attack, which Escobar asserts was deliberate. Parallel to the attack in Sevastopol, Dagestan experienced the reactivation of ultra-extremist Islamic cell. This group's rampage resulted in the deaths of at least 20 people, including the brutal killing of a Russian Orthodox priest, reminiscent of the modus operandi of ISIS. The coordination of these attacks on the significant Russian holiday suggests a concerted effort to terrorize the population. The Russian response to these provocations has been cautious and calculated. President Putin has indicated that the response could be symmetrical or asymmetrical, leaving the international community in anticipation of Russia's next move. Escobar emphasizes the seriousness of the situation, suggesting that the summer could bring further attacks and test the limits of Russia's patience. These attacks and the subsequent Russian response have far-reaching implications for the geopolitical landscape. Escobar points to the potential for a no-fly zone over the Black Sea and the possibility of Russia bringing evidence to the UN Security Council to hold those responsible and accountable. The narrative paints a picture of a Russia poised on the edge of significant strategic decisions, which the world is watching intently. Escobar dismisses Western media narratives that suggest a rift between China and Russia over North Korea. He asserts that the Russia-China strategic partnership is ironclad and that Putin's visit to North Korea was strategic, a move towards a pan-Asian security arrangement. This partnership includes a treaty with Iran and aims to establish a security framework involving major Eurasian actors. He views European leaders, particularly Macron, as irrelevant in the current geopolitical landscape. Escobar predicts Macron's political end and dismisses any potential for a meaningful dialogue between Russia and European leaders. He criticizes the EU's foreign policy and expects worsening relations due to the appointment of the new EU foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas. At the forefront of the discussion is a burgeoning strategic partnership between Russia and China. This alliance, marked by mutual interests and shared perspectives on global governance, stands as a testament to the changing tides of power. The collaboration between these two nations is not merely a response to Western hegemony, but a proactive step towards carving a new path in international diplomacy. The conversation also casts critical eye on the European Union and NATO, whose futures seem increasingly uncertain amidst the current geopolitical turmoil. The collapse of these entities, as suggested by Escobar, could redefine the political and economic landscape of Europe, leading to a re-evaluation of alliances and objectives. India's role in this geopolitical game is another focal point of their exchange. As a nation with growing economic and military capabilities, India's decision could significantly influence the balance of power. Furthermore, the BRICS framework, particularly the inclusion of Kazan, underscores the potential for emerging economies to shape the future of international relations. The BRICS Plus Cities and Municipalities Organization is highlighted as a novel initiative that adds a new dimension to cooperation among developing nations. This platform could foster deeper ties at the municipal level, promoting sustainable development and cultural exchange. Amidst the strategic discourse, the conversation does not overlook the human element, particularly the case of Julian Assange. The potential release of Assange after a decades-long legal battle is a poignant reminder of the individual cost of political machinations. The negotiations between his lawyers and the U.S. Department of Justice, aiming to find a face-saving resolution, reflect the intricate dance of diplomacy and justice. In conclusion, the dialogue between Pepe Escobar and Nima is a compelling narrative that underscores the need for strategic thinking and long-term planning in the geopolitical arena. It is a reminder that games of nations is complex, with high stakes for all involved. As the world watches the unfolding events across Eurasia, the insights from this conversation will undoubtedly resonate with those seeking to understand the undercurrents of global politics. Now let's go on to Glen Greenwald's debunking lies about Julian Assange. In the realm of journalism, the political discourse, a few figures have been as polarizing as Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, and who has been lauded for his commitment to transparency and vilified for the alleged risks his disclosures have posed. Amidst this dichotomy of opinions, Glen Greenwald's report emerges as a beacon of clarity, meticulously debunking the falsehood propagated by Assange's detractors while presenting cogent counter-arguments that reinforce the sanctity of press freedom. Greenwald's report is a scathing indictment on the mainstream media's complicity in disseminating misinformation about Assange. He exposes the tsunami of lies that followed the news of Assange's release, highlighting the media's eagerness to justify his prolonged confinement without trial. The report underscores the media's reluctance to criticize the Biden administration's decision to release Assange, revealing an inherent bias that skews public perception. The essence of Greenwald's argument lies in his ability to distinguish between lies and misleading statements. He challenges the narrative that Assange's indictment by a grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia validates his criminality. Greenwald elucidates the one-sided nature of grand jury proceedings, where the absence of a defensive narrative renders the indictment process a mere formality, often misconstrued as a testament to guilt. Greenwald's report is not merely a defense of Assange, but a defense of journalism itself. He refutes the claim that Assange's actions were beyond the pale of journalistic conduct. By highlighting the use of secure drop technology by prominent media outlets, Greenwald demonstrates that encouraging sources to provide classified information is a standard journalistic practice, thereby nullifying the argument that Assange's methods were uniquely criminal. The report also addresses the oft-repeated assertion that Assange's publications endangered lives. Greenwald challenges readers to produce evidence, even just one, of harm caused by WikiLeaks disclosures, pointing to investigations after investigation that contradict claims of endangerment. This argument is pivotal, as it not only exonerates Assange, but also questions the integrity of those who perpetuate such unfounded accusations. Greenwald's critique extends to the selective portrayal of Assange as a non-journalist by government officials. He argues that the First Amendment rights are not exclusive to a journalistic elite, but are accessible to all citizens. This democratization of press freedom is a cornerstone of Greenwald's counter-arguments, emphasizing that journalism is not defined by allegiance to power, but by a commitment to truth. In conclusion, Greenwald's report is a compelling vindication of Julian Assange. It serves as a critical reminder of the role of journalism in holding power accountable and the dangers of allowing the narrative to be controlled by those in authority. Greenwald's meticulous deconstruction of the lies about Assange is not just a defense of one man, but a defense of the principles that underpin a free and informed society. Let's go on to Tucker Carlson's views on Julian Assange. And his recent debate has provided a wealth of insight into his perspectives. The following summary delves into Carlson's views as presented in the debate, drawn from a consolidated summary of his speech. Carlson begins by addressing his admiration for Australia, praising its natural resources and middle-class society. He sees Australia as a country with significant potential for global influence. However, he cautions against mass immigration and poor leadership decisions that could undermine the nation's advantages. A significant portion of Carlson's critique is directed at the media. He accuses the media of aligning with powerful entities rather than serving its role as a watchdog that challenges authority. This alignment, according to Carlson, has led to a failure in holding those in power accountable, which is detrimental to the democratic process. Carlson views on foreign policy are particularly focused on the West's actions, especially regarding Ukraine. He also discusses the case of Julian Assange, as emphasizing the importance of leaders prioritizing their citizens' interests. He warns against the criminalization of free speech and believes it exemplifies which he believes is exemplified by Assange's situation. Carlson's stance on foreign policy is firmly rooted in the belief that a nation's actions abroad should primarily serve the interests of its own citizens. He questions the West's involvement in conflicts like the one in Ukraine, suggesting that such engagements often do not have clear benefits for the home country and can lead to unintended consequences. Carlson reacts passionately to the release of Julian Assange, whom he views as a symbol of the struggle for free speech and transparency. He expresses relief and satisfaction at Assange's release after 12 years in custody, which he describes as monstrous. For Carlson, Assange's prolonged detention for exposing crimes committed by others is a perversion of justice. He argues that typically it is the perpetrator of a crime who should face punishment, not the one who uncovers it. Carlson is critical of the U.S. government's role in Assange's detention, pointing out that while the UK facilitated his release, the U.S. had demanded his custody. He challenges the consistency of this approach with the principle of rule of law and democracy, implying that the U.S. government's actions contradict the values it professes to uphold. Upon his release, Assange was dealing with legal proceedings before planning to return to Australia, his birthplace. Carlson shares a personal anecdote of texting with Assange's wife, indicating that Assange intends to stay in Australia. This detail underscores Carlson's view that individuals like Assange play a crucial role in society by holding the powerful accountable and providing the public with the truth. The integrity of the U.S. election system is another concern for Carlson. He criticizes the use of electronic voting machines and the changes in voting methods due to COVID-19. He advocates for voter ID laws to ensure fair elections, highlighting the need for a transparent and trustworthy electoral process. Carlson vehemently denies any association with racist theories or inspiring violence. He takes firm stance against violence and asserts the right to self-defense. His approach to interviewing figures like Putin is defended on the basis that forming independent opinions is crucial rather than being influenced by prevailing media narratives. In conclusion, Tucker Carlson's debate performance paints a picture of a commentator deeply concerned with the national self-interest, responsible governance, and the preservation of fundamental human rights. His views, while controversial to some, reflect a desire for a media that holds power to account, a foreign policy that serves the people, and an election system that operates with integrity. Whether one agrees with Carlson or not, his arguments provoked thought and discussion on the state of leadership, media responsibility, and the preservation of democratic values. Now let's go on to Judging Freedom's interview with Anya Parampil. Parampil's discourse on Assange's contribution to democracy has underscored the incalculable value of the truths he unveiled through WikiLeaks. The platform's revelations have not only exposed the darkest secrets of the United States government and its global intelligence apparatus, but have also initiated processes whose full consequences are yet to unfold. The significance of WikiLeaks extends beyond the immediate shockwaves it discloses. It has become an indispensable tool for journalists and researchers worldwide, as evidenced by Parampil's own investigative work at the Grey Zone. The interview highlights the critical role of WikiLeaks in shaping contemporary political events such as the military coup in Bolivia. Parampil's recounting of using WikiLeaks as a primary research tool at the Grey Zone exemplifies the enduring utility of Assange's legacy. The platform's extensive database continues to serve as a gift that keeps on giving, enabling journalists to uncover hidden truths and hold power to account. Parampil's reflection on the Venezuelan Guri Dam incident further demonstrates the investigative power granted by WikiLeaks. The Stratfor leaks, which detailed the discussion within U.S. intelligence circles about targeting Venezuela's critical infrastructure, provided crucial context to the Venezuelan government's claims of sabotage. This instance, among others, showcases how WikiLeaks has armed the public with the knowledge necessary to challenge official narratives and seek accountability. The conversation also touched upon the broader implications of Assange's persecution and the dangerous precedent set by his prosecution under the Espionage Act. Parampil's assertion that Assange's guilty plea poses a threat to journalism at large resonates with the concerns of free press advocates. The use of the Espionage Act to prosecute a publisher for revealing war crimes and human rights abuses, marked a chilling departure from the principle of a free and open society. Parampil's unwavering belief in the Constitution and the rights it guarantees reflects a deep commitment to the ideals of American democracy. Her fearlessness in the face of potential persecution embodies the spirit of journalistic integrity and the pursuit of truth. The interview concludes with a hopeful note, suggesting that Assange's release represents a victory for truth and a reminder that humanity can triumph over darkness. In summary, Anya Parampil's interview with Judge Napolitano serves as a powerful testament to the enduring relevance of Julian Assange's work. It underscores the necessity of transparency and the courage of those who dare to reveal uncomfortable truths as the world grapples with the complexities of information warfare and the erosion of democratic values. The legacy of Assange and the tenacity of journalists like Parampil offer a beacon of hope for a more informed and just global society. Now let's move on to Napolitano's interview with Aaron Mate. Aaron Mate's perspective, as articulated in this recent interview with Judge Napolitano, represents a critical analysis of the United States foreign policy, particularly in relation to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Mate's views are centered around the notion that the U.S. is utilizing Ukraine as a tool to bleed Russia, a strategy that he argues is not aimed at defending Ukraine or bringing the war to an end, but rather at inflicting pain on Russia. This approach, according to Mate, is explicitly stated by the Biden administration, with figures like Lord Austin and Jake Sullivan openly declaring their intentions to weaken Russia. Mate expresses concern over the escalation of hostilities, citing the recent terrorist strike in Sevastopol, which resulted in civilian casualties. He raises questions about the extent of U.S. involvement in such attacks, noting allegations of U.S. assistance and the use of U.S. supplied weaponry. The essay would delve into the implications of these actions, exploring the potential risks of nuclear Armageddon and the ethical considerations of supporting Ukrainian ultra-nationalists who reject the Minsk Accords and the rights of Russian-speaking people in Ukraine. Furthermore, Mate discusses the historical context of Ukraine's neutrality, pointing out that it was a founding principle enshrined in Ukraine's declaration of state at the end of the Cold War. He criticizes the U.S. and UK's influence in sabotaging potential peace agreements such as the one nearly reached in Istanbul in 2022, which he attributes to Western reluctance to provide security guarantees to Ukraine. The report also examines the broader geopolitical implications of the U.S.'s stance, including the abandonment of diplomacy and the pursuit of hegemonic foreign policy that it disregards the sovereignty and desires of other nations. Mate's interview suggests that the U.S. is not only risking further escalation in Ukraine, but also undermining their prospects for long-term peace and stability in the region. In conclusion, Aaron Mate's interview with Judge Napolitano offers a sobering critique of the U.S. foreign policy, highlighting the dangers of using Ukraine as a battleground for proxy warfare against Russia. His insights call for a reassessment of the goals and methods employed by the U.S. in international conflicts, advocating for a return to diplomatic solutions and respect for the self-determination of nations. The essay would argue that such a shift is necessary to prevent further loss of life and to foster a more peaceful and cooperative international order. Now let's go on to Andrei Martayno'v's recent report, which represents a comprehensive analysis of the current geopolitical landscape with a particular focus on the dynamics between the United States and Russia. Martayno'v, a recognized expert in military and naval affairs, delves into the intricacies of military technology, strategic planning, and the shifting balance of power on the global stage. Martayno'v begins by discussing the political maneuvering surrounding Julian Assange's release, suggesting that it is a strategic move by the Biden administration to curry favor with certain demographics in the upcoming election. He emphasizes the importance of journalistic integrity as demonstrated by Assange, while also highlighting the lack of foresight in the handling of classified documents by Assange and the WikiLeaks. The report transitions into a detailed examination of the United States' involvement in global conflicts, particularly in the Middle East, and its implications for international relations. Martayno'v criticizes the U.S. for its actions against civilians in helping the terrorist attacks in Crimea, labeling them as war crimes, and contrasts this with Russia's approach to military engagement, which clearly specifically avoids targeting innocent civilians. A significant portion of the report is dedicated to discussing the advancements in military technology, especially hypersonic weapons. Martayno'v claims that Russia has achieved a technological edge over the U.S., particularly in the development and deployment of hypersonic missiles. He argues that this superiority could alter the strategic calculus, potentially leading to a shift in global power dynamics. Martayno'v provides a scathing critique of the U.S. military's strategic capabilities, suggesting that the Pentagon lacks the intellectual resources to understand and engage in modern warfare effectively. He contrasts this with Russia's methodical approach to military strategy and operational planning, which he believes is more suited for the complexities of 21st century warfare. The report does not shy away from the human cost of the conflict, particularly in Ukraine. Martayno'v presents stark statistics on military losses, on the impact of civilian populations. He suggests the sustainability of He questions the sustainability of the Ukrainian military strategy and the broader implications for the country's future. In the realm of diplomacy, Martayno'v discusses the recent communications between U.S. and Russian defense ministries. He interprets these talks as a sign of the U.S.'s concern over Russia's military capabilities and its potential influence in the regions like the Caribbean and the Middle East. Martayno'v concludes his report with a call for realism and restraint in international relations. He urges the U.S. to recognize the limits of its own power and to engage in constructive dialogue with Russia. He warns against underestimating Russia's resolve, and the potential consequences of continued aggression. In essence, Martayno'v's report serves as a sobering reminder of the complexities of global politics, and the importance of strategic foresight. His analysis underscores the need for a nuanced understanding of military capabilities and the potential ramifications of geopolitical decisions. As tensions continue to rise on the global stage, Martayno'v's insight offer a valuable perspective on the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. All right, now let's move on to Piers Morgan's recent episodes in his show Uncensored. In this most recent episode, it opened with Piers Morgan framing the debate around the polarizing figure of Julian Assange, whose actions have sparked global controversy. The panelists include Judge Andrei Martayno'v, Ben Ferguson, Michael Shellenberger, and Louise Mensch, who were tasked with dissecting Assange's impact on journalism and national security. Michael Shellenberger celebrated the release of Assange and decried the grave injustice carried out by the United States Department of Justice that not only persecuted Assange for 12 years, it cowed the British government to go along with his persecution, eventually leading to his 7-year imprisonment in the Ecuadorian embassy, then 5 years in England's infamous Belmarsh prison. He also indicts prominent media personalities that all but turned their backs on Assange and joined in the persecution. He also focused on the ethical dilemma faced by journalists when handling leaked information. He pondered the balance between exposing wrongdoing and protecting the sensitive data. However, in the interest of freedom, democracy, and transparency, he clearly leans towards erring on the side of freedom of journalists to publish state secrets, which he believes as a natural counterweight to government's tendencies to overreach if left unchecked. Judge Andrei Martayno'v argued for the sanctity of the First Amendment, emphasizing the right of journalists to publish government secrets in the public interest. He drew parallels between Assange's work and historic instances of whistleblowing, such as the Pentagon Papers. Such work should not only be protected, it should be celebrated and encouraged, as it puts elected officials on high alert, knowing that ultimately they will answer to the people for their misdeeds and mistakes. Indeed, the judge would see monuments built in honor of Assange and those like him. Ben Ferguson countered, highlighting the potential harm caused by releasing unredacted documents. He questioned the morality of Assange's approach, suggesting that the endangerment of lives cannot be justified under the guise of transparency. He repeatedly accuses Assange of being directly responsible for the deaths of servicemen and women who were outed by Assange's reporting. However, when pressed, his only evidence are the online threats of Taliban leaders to severely punish all collaborators and spies who appear in the WikiLeaks. While perhaps credible, he did not corroborate those threats with actual observable facts. Ferguson vehemently and perhaps petulantly argued his position, betraying an emotional attachment to the issue that could be compromising his objectivity. Louise Mensch held views similar, if not identical, to Ben Ferguson's, but went quite a bit further in her disdain and disgust of Assange. She, in no uncertain terms, condemned Assange, claiming that what he endured was not near enough, and heaped scorn and derision upon the beleaguered journalist. However, when pressed on the similarity between the actions of Assange and the British journalist that brought to light the British MP's expense scandal in the UK, Minch did not mount a convincing counter-argument, which amounted to a spurious claim that Assange stole, or at least encouraged, Chelsea Manning to steal the documents that ultimately became the WikiLeaks. Napolitano and Schellenberger quickly dispatched that claim, drawing parallels with what Assange did and what journalists in major outlets do on a frequent basis, but who never faced the same legal persecution DOJ mounted against Assange. The debate intensified as the panelists delved into Assange's plea deal to avoid extradition to the U.S. While seen as a personal victory for Assange, concerns were raised about the potential chilling effect on investigative journalism and the precedent it set for future whistleblowers. The conversation also touched upon the inconsistent political reactions to the Assange's case, reflecting the shifting landscape of support based on political convenience rather than principle. Robert Kennedy Jr. made a special appearance, providing a critical view of the current state of journalism. He lamented the media's alignment with government interests and called for a return to a press that challenges authority and exposes hidden actions. Kennedy criticized the privatization of presidential debates by corporations like CNN and advocated for the pardon of whistleblowers, including Assange and Edward Snowden. Kennedy shared his predictions for the upcoming presidential debates, foreseeing Trump's success due to his debating skills. He also speculated on the potential change of Democratic nominee at the convention and expressed his own aspirations for the presidency. The episode concluded with a reflection on the importance of free speech, the role of the press in a democracy, and the need for transparency and accountability in government. It underscored the complex interplay between these ideals and the protection of sensitive information, leaving viewers to ponder the true cost of secrecy and the value of truth in our society. Lastly, let's go on to Piers Morgan's interview with George Galloway. In their recent interview, a range of contentious topics were discussed, reflecting their polarizing views of both individuals on international affairs. Galloway, known for his fire rhetoric and staunch positions, delved into the Israeli-Palestine conflict with a critical stance of this two-state solution, deeming it unfeasible. He proposed a single state where equality reigns, condemned terroristic acts, while acknowledging resistance against occupation. His perspective on the war in Gaza was particularly scathing, as he describes the situation as akin to an open-air prison camp, suggesting that the conditions were ripe for a prisoner's revolt. On the subject of Hamas, Galloway did not shy away from condemning acts of terrorism, but also pointed out the complexities of the resistance against Israeli occupation. His views extended to the broader Middle East, criticizing Western involvement and expressing skepticism about the effectiveness of Brexit, advocating for UK independence. George Galloway's ideas regarding a one-state solution in Israel and Palestine are rooted in his belief in equal human rights and freedoms for all individuals and regions. Galloway expressed that the two-state solution, which he once supported, now seems unfeasible to him. He reflected on the Oslo Agreement, admitting that he feels foolish having believed in a two-state solution, as almost 40 years later there is not 1 centimeter of Palestine free, and Gaza is in ruins. His advocacy for a one-state solution comes from the place of disillusionment with the failed promises of past agreements and the ongoing suffering of the Palestinian people. Galloway envisions a single state where Palestinians and Israelis have equal rights and live together, though he acknowledges the challenges and resistance that this idea faces. Piers Morgan, in response, added a significant but to Galloway's argument, pointing to the actions of Hamas and the complexity of situation. Morgan questioned the timing of Galloway's critique, especially in the light of the violence perpetrated by Hamas on October 7th, and then suggested that the expansion of settlements is not the sole cause of the current mayhem. When the conversation shifted to Ukraine and Russia, Galloway's views were clear. He criticized the West's provocation and expressed a controversial reference to preference for Vladimir Putin over Western leaders, which undoubtedly raised eyebrows. His commentary on Russia's political and military actions, particularly in relation to Ukraine, highlights his belief in the legitimacy of Russia's claims over certain territories and his distrust of NATO's intentions. Morgan, on the other hand, provided a counter-argument that questioned the naivety of Galloway's trust in Putin and criticized his views on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Morgan challenged Galloway's condemnation of the actions of Hamas, particularly on a day of significant violence, which Morgan described as barbaric and medieval. Morgan's critique extended to the broader historical context of Israel-Palestine conflict, discussing the displacement and bloodshed that has fueled the enduring strife for decades. He highlighted the complexity of the issue, referencing Jonathan Freeland's column that explored the grievances of both sides without taking a definitive stance. The exchange between Galloway and Morgan was emblematic of their respective reputations, Galloway as a controversial populist orator and Morgan as a challenging interviewer. The interview serves as a platform for a heated debate on political and military actions, the role of influential figures, and the divisive issues that shape our world. And that's it for today's episode of Dialogue. That's it for today's episode of Geopolitics Digest. I hope that was helpful. If you found this information helpful, give me a like, subscribe to the channel, and for sure go back and watch the interviews in their entirety. Again, I've placed titles and timestamps so you can go back and watch only ones that you wanted or watch them all in their entirety. Well, until next time, that's it.